All right, today we're diving into something pretty wild. It's a detailed projection, a look ahead at the next 75 years. And it's all about a future that's going to be defined by our war with one single relentless enemy, the rising sea.
So, what if you could actually see the next 75 years of this war with the sea? And look, this isn't just some wild guess. We're about to walk through a forecast that's actually driven by data, a projection showing us exactly how our world map is going to get redrawn literally by water.
Okay, so let's start with Act 1, the unraveling. This first phase, running from 2026 to 2041, isn't about some sudden Hollywood-style disaster. No, it's more of a slow, creeping crisis. It's a time defined by reaction, a period where all the systems we count on just start to buckle and break under the pressure.
And what's really striking is just how fast things escalate. I mean, look at this timeline. It all kicks off with money, right? 2026, coastal insurance just collapses. A year later, bam, 2027. Those once-in-a-century tides, they're happening every year. By 2028, the UN has to create a whole new category, Oceanic Climate Refugees. And by 2030, a massive new global industry pops up, building these gigantic seawalls. But the really chilling part? That comes in 2033, when governments decide to stop defending and start forcing people to retreat.
And that forced retreat gets a name, climate quarantine zones. I know, it sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but this projection shows it becoming a very real, very widespread government tool. They just designate these coastal areas as condemned, and then they cut off the water, the power, everything to make them unlivable. So the key takeaway here is that leaving is no longer a choice, it's enforced.
And this whole policy, this managed retreat, it just carves this stark new line across the entire globe. You end up with this brutal separation between the people who can afford to build walls and everyone else, who's basically just left to the waves. Yeah, this slide really lays it all out. You've got two groups, the fortified and the forsaken. The fortified are the megacities, right? New York, Tokyo. They've got the trillions of dollars needed to build these massive defenses, and they're essentially buying their own survival. But then you have the forsaken. These are hundreds of smaller coastal cities, mostly in the global south, that are just deemed too expensive to save. By 2040, they're not just abandoned, they're officially wiped right off the map.
But, after all that chaos and retreat, humanity does what it does best. It shifts gears. And that brings us to Act 2, the Great Adaptation. This is the part where we stop just reacting to disasters and start radically re-engineering our world just to survive.
And if there's one single number that perfectly captures this huge shift, it's this one. The year is 2037. And in that year, the global revenue for the industrial water pump industry actually surpasses the oil industry. Just think about that. The business of moving water becomes more valuable than the business of drilling for oil. It's the end of one economic era and the beginning of a totally new one, driven by one simple need: staying dry.
So this new economy, it fuels some of the most insane, most ambitious engineering projects humanity has ever seen. We're way past just building walls at this point. We're talking about completely remaking our cities from the ground up. Okay, let's look at New Orleans. In this future, it becomes America's very first fortress city. I mean, it's completely sealed off from the Gulf of Mexico by 15-meter-high walls. The only reason it's not an aquarium is because of this network of megapumps running 24/7, all powered by a dedicated fusion energy plant. It's basically an island of defiance sitting in a rising sea.
Miami's plan is, well, even crazier. They can't just build a wall because the ground underneath is porous, like a sponge. So they do the unthinkable. They decide to raise the entire city. We're talking about physically elevating all the streets by 3 meters. That ground floor apartment you used to live in, it's now a boat canal. The city stops fighting the water and just learns to live with it. It becomes this kind of vertical Venice.
But maybe the most radical adaptation of all comes from the Maldives. I mean, they're facing total annihilation, right? Their islands are going under. So the entire nation-state makes a wild decision. They're abandoning land altogether. They start building these gigantic modular floating platforms out in the open sea and just move their entire population, their whole government, onto them. It's the ultimate survival play, becoming a nation that literally floats on the ocean.
So, what's the result of all this incredible adaptation? Well, by 2080, you have a whole new generation that's born and raised in these crazy new environments. For them, a world that isn't part fortress or part canal or part floating city, that's just something they read about in history books. They're the aquatic generation, and their entire culture is shaped by living with the sea, right at their doorstep.
And that finally brings us to Act 3, drawing the new map. We jump forward to the year 2100. The decades of chaos have finally settled down. The Great Adaptation is more or less complete, and a new, stable world has emerged. But honestly, it's a world we would barely recognize.
So what's the final tally after these 75 years of struggle? Well, the numbers are pretty stark. Sea levels are up by 1.5 to 2 meters. A staggering 20% of the entire coastal population of the world is just gone, permanently displaced. Our civilization has fundamentally changed. We're not really a land-based species anymore. We've become an amphibious civilization.
But, and this is a big but, survival in this new amphibious world was not universal, not by a long shot. So who made it and who was submerged? This projection gives us a final, pretty brutal scorecard.
And when you look at this global report, a really clear pattern emerges. It all came down to wealth and technology. You see it in Europe, where an engineering powerhouse like Rotterdam survives, but a historical treasure like Venice is lost. In North America, the financial heart of Manhattan is saved, but even those hyper-adapted cities like Miami and New Orleans, they're ultimately lost. The story just repeats itself all over the globe. The rich, fortified city centers survive, and the sprawling, more vulnerable coastal areas, they're gone.
This comparison, I think, really brings it all home. You've got two European cities, both famous for their relationship with water. Rotterdam doubles down on engineering and becomes this unbreakable fortress that actually exports its survival tact to the rest of the world. And Venice? Well, Venice loses the fight. It surrenders to the sea and becomes this kind of eerie underwater museum, a tourist destination for submarines, a memory of a world that doesn't exist anymore.
And this quote really says it all, doesn't it? Humanity has passed from a terrestrial to an amphibious species. Because in the end, this 75-year war with the sea didn't just change our maps, it changed us. We didn't just build walls to keep the ocean out, we ended up integrating it into our very existence. We transformed ourselves from a species that lives on land into, well, something completely new.
But that's where the projection leaves us, in the year 2100. It shows us a world that's stabilized, but it leaves us with one massive, hanging question. What happens next? What does this new amphibious civilization do? What are the new conflicts, the new challenges for a species that's now living half on land and half in these engineered fortresses surrounded by water? I guess that's the question this future leaves for us.